there is a number that the retirement industry does not want to be the centerpiece of the conversation about retirement in America. It is not a complicated number. It does not require any financial expertise to understand. It is simply the median retirement savings balance of Americans who are between the ages of 55 and 64. The people who are closest to the conventional retirement age, the people for whom the window to make significant changes to their retirement trajectory is the narrowest. The number is approximately $134,000. $134,000. For people who are 10 years or less from the age at which they expected to stop working, at a standard 4% withdrawal rate, which is the rate that financial planners have historically used as the benchmark for sustainable retirement income that does not deplete the principal too quickly, $134,000 generates approximately $447 per month in retirement income. Not per week, per month. $447 per month from a lifetime of work and saving for the people who are closest to needing that income to sustain their lives. The median Social Security benefit for a retired worker in America is approximately $1,800 per month. Combined with the investment income from the median retirement savings balance, the typical American approaching retirement is looking at a monthly income of approximately $2,250 before taxes. In an economy where the median monthly housing cost for a homeowner with a mortgage exceeds $1,500 and the average monthly healthcare cost for a retiree not yet eligible for Medicare can exceed $800 per month. The math does not work. For the median American approaching retirement, the math does not come close to working. And the gap between what the numbers say and what most people believe about their retirement trajectory is one of the most consequential financial disconnects in American life. This is not a story about laziness or irresponsibility. The people represented by that median savings figure are not people who failed to understand the importance of saving for retirement. They are people who are navigating a set of structural realities, economic pressures, and psychological dynamics that made adequate retirement saving genuinely difficult in ways that the financial industry's standard advice, maximize your contributions and stay the course, does not adequately address. Understanding those structural realities is the beginning of understanding both why the crisis exists and what is still possible for individuals at different stages of their working lives. Let us start with the structural reality that has received the least attention relative to its impact on retirement outcomes. The shift from defined benefit pension plans to defined contribution plans, like the 401k over the past 4 decades, is the single most consequential structural change in the American retirement system, and its full implications have still not been absorbed by most workers or by most public conversation about retirement. Understanding what was lost in that shift and what was placed on the individual worker in exchange is essential to understanding why the retirement crisis exists despite decades of financial literacy campaigns, 401k marketing, and available advice. A defined benefit pension plan, the kind that was standard for most American workers through the middle of the 20th century, promised a specific monthly income in retirement based on a formula that typically incorporated years of service and final salary. The investment risk was borne by the employer. The longevity risk, meaning the risk of living longer than expected and running out of money, was borne by the plan. The worker contributed to the plan and received a guaranteed income stream in retirement that would last as long as they lived, regardless of market performance or personal investment decisions. A defined contribution plan, like the 401k, on the other hand, places the investment risk entirely on the worker. The worker decides how much to contribute, subject to annual limits. The worker decides how to invest the contributions, selecting from a menu of options whose quality and cost vary enormously between plans. The worker bears the risk that markets will decline near their planned retirement date, reducing their balance at exactly the moment they need it most. The worker bears the longevity risk, meaning they must manage withdrawals carefully enough that the money does not run out before they do. And the worker must make all of these decisions year after year, decade after decade, without the professional investment management, risk pooling, and actuarial expertise that made the defined benefit system work. The shift to defined contribution plans was sold to workers as an improvement: more flexibility, more portability, more personal control. What it actually represented was the transfer of enormous financial risk from institutions with the scale, expertise, and resources to manage that risk to individuals who, in the vast majority of cases, lacked the financial knowledge, the behavioral discipline, and the consistent income necessary to manage it successfully on their own. The result of this transfer is visible in the median retirement savings figures. When the responsibility for managing retirement risk sits with an institution, most workers end up with adequate retirement income because the institution has the tools and incentives to manage the process successfully. When the responsibility sits with individuals making complex financial decisions over decades while also managing careers, families, healthcare crises, housing costs, and every other demand on their time and financial resources, the outcomes are dramatically more variable, and the median outcome is dramatically lower. This is not an argument for or against any particular policy approach to retirement. It is an explanation of why the retirement crisis exists that is more structurally honest than the dominant narrative, which places the responsibility for inadequate retirement savings primarily on individual workers who failed to save enough. Many of those workers were navigating a system that was poorly designed for human financial behavior, and the evidence of that poor design is visible in the aggregate retirement savings data. Now let us look at the behavioral and psychological dynamics that compound the structural problem. The first dynamic is what behavioral economists call hyperbolic discounting, which is the tendency of human beings to place disproportionately high value on present consumption relative to future consumption. We encountered a version of this in the conversation about present bias earlier in this channel. In the retirement context, hyperbolic discounting manifests as the persistent underweighting of future retirement needs relative to present financial demands. When you are 32 years old and managing a mortgage, childcare costs, car payments, and a dozen other immediate financial obligations, the retirement that is 33 years away does not feel real in the way that the mortgage payment due on the first of the month feels real. The brain does not process a need that is 3 decades away with the same urgency as a need that is 30 days away. This is not a failure of intelligence or financial sophistication. It is how human brains process time and probability, and it systematically leads people to undersave for retirement throughout their working years, particularly in the earlier decades when the compounding impact of additional contributions would be greatest. The second dynamic is what researchers call the complexity barrier. The American retirement savings system is extraordinarily complex. Multiple account types with different tax treatments, contribution limits, eligibility requirements, and withdrawal rules. Investment menus with dozens or hundreds of options whose differences are not obvious to non-specialists. Required minimum distribution rules, Roth conversion strategies, Social Security optimization decisions, sequence of returns, risk management. Each of these elements involves genuine complexity, and the complexity itself is a barrier that causes many workers to avoid engaging with the retirement planning process altogether rather than engaging with it imperfectly. This avoidance is rational in a narrow sense. Making a complex decision poorly can feel worse than not making it at all, particularly when the consequences of the decision are decades away. But the avoidance is financially catastrophic over time because the years during which contributions and compounding are most powerful are often the years during which workers are most likely to avoid the complexity rather than navigate it. The third dynamic is the income volatility problem that affects a growing percentage of the American workforce. The standard retirement savings advice assumes a consistent income stream from which a consistent percentage can be directed to retirement savings over a consistent career trajectory. For workers with variable income, whether from self-employment, gig work, seasonal employment, or careers that involve periods of unemployment, this assumption does not hold. The years of lower income, which are exactly the years when retirement contributions are most difficult, are also years during which the compounding impact of missed contributions is significant over the long horizon. And the psychological experience of income volatility, the persistent financial anxiety that accompanies uncertain income, makes long-term financial planning feel both less feasible and less emotionally accessible. So what is actually possible? Because this story is not hopeless, and the steps that remain available depend enormously on where in the timeline you're sitting. If you're in your 20s or early 30s, the most important thing this data should tell you is that the conventional advice to maximize your retirement contributions as early as possible is not a cliche. It is mathematically urgent in a way that is difficult to overstate. The difference in final retirement balance between someone who starts contributing aggressively at 25 and someone who starts at 35 is not linear. It is exponential because the contributions made in the earlier decade have a decade more of compounding to work with. Every year of delay in this window costs you more than the year before it cost you, because the compounding base grows over time. If you are in your late 30s or 40s, the retirement savings data should be a catalyst for urgency rather than a source of despair. The catch-up contribution provisions in the 401k and IRA allow workers over 50 to contribute additional amounts beyond the standard annual limits, specifically because Congress recognized that many workers arrive at the back half of their working lives with inadequate retirement savings and need accelerated accumulation opportunities. Maximizing these catch-up provisions, combined with a deliberate strategy to reduce pre-retirement expenses and extend the working years if health permits, can meaningfully improve retirement outcomes even from a significant deficit position. If you're in your 50s and the retirement savings data describes your situation more accurately than you are comfortable admitting, the most important shift is from the accumulation mindset to the optimization mindset. The question is no longer only how much can I save, but how can I optimize every element of my retirement income picture, including Social Security claiming strategy, healthcare cost management, housing decisions, part-time work possibilities, and spending structure in early retirement to make the assets I have worked as effectively as possible for as long as possible. Social Security claiming strategy alone can meaningfully change retirement income outcomes. The difference in monthly benefit between claiming at 62 and claiming at 70 is approximately 76% for most workers. For someone in reasonable health who has alternatives to Social Security income in the early retirement years, delaying claiming can add tens of thousands of dollars to lifetime Social Security benefits. This decision, which is available to every American worker, regardless of their retirement savings balance, is consistently underutilized because the complexity of the optimization and the immediate appeal of beginning to receive benefits as soon as possible work against the financially superior strategy of delay. The retirement crisis in America is real. The median savings figures are not anecdotes. They are data that describes the financial reality of the majority of American workers who are approaching the end of their working lives. But the crisis is not equally distributed across the population, and it is not equally irreversible for everyone it affects. The structural problems that created it are genuine and require policy responses that are beyond the scope of any individual to address. The behavioral and psychological dynamics that compound those structural problems are real, but addressable through specific, learnable interventions. And the decisions that remain available to individuals at every stage of their working lives, while not sufficient to close every gap for everyone, are more powerful than most people realize when they are understood clearly and acted upon consistently. The retirement you imagine may not be exactly achievable given where you are starting from. A financially secure later life, built on a combination of whatever savings you can still accumulate, optimized Social Security income, strategic housing decisions, and realistic spending expectations remains available to more people than the headline data suggests. But it requires engaging with the reality of the data rather than avoiding it, and making the specific decisions that are still available rather than waiting for a different set of options to appear. Next week on Quiet Rich, I'm covering the story of a 26-year-old who built a $10 million business by breaking virtually every rule that conventional business advice tells entrepreneurs to follow, and what his methods reveal about the difference between the business strategies that sound right and the ones that actually produce results. Subscribe so you do not miss it. New videos every Tuesday and Friday.